Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Context Studios Band Book Club, where we read like freedom depends on it. I'm so excited to have you guys here with me today while we discuss the book of the month, which was The Hate You Give. This book was written in 2017 by Angie Thomas. We'll talk a little bit today about the kind of context around when the book was written, why this book has been challenged and banned, some of the important themes of the book that I think are really necessary to talk about, and why or why not this book should stay in school. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. I also want to just give a trigger warning about this video. We're going to be talking about police violence, racism, gang violence, things like death, grief, domestic violence, and also just in general, a big theme in this book is racial profiling and systematic injustice, especially in how the criminal justice system and specifically police treat African Americans and people of color within the US. So just wanted to put that out there, proceed with caution. And as usual, I'm going to be doing an activity. You probably don't know this about me. I mean, why would you? But every 3 months, I don't know why I said four, every 3 months since 2023, so pretty much each season, I make vision boards. So they're kind of like vision boards, mood boards. They're pictures of things that I want to do, things that are inspiring to me, things that I'm trying to kind of manifest for myself. A lot of it has to do with growth, figuring out kind of my own identity. Some of the things come true, some of them don't, but I think for the most part they do. So it is about to be summertime. So I have printed out different pictures of things that I'm hoping to do this summer, things that I will definitely be sharing on this channel if you guys are interested, and cutting them out and placing them on the board right here. So this is the most recent one, and it was for March, April, May, and now we're going into the summertime. So it's time to reset. I do different things as well to kind of reset each season. Maybe I'll talk about that one day or at some point. But so just to kind of say as well, me doing this activity does not take away from the seriousness of what I'm talking about in these videos with this topic specifically. It's just a way for me to keep my hands busy and stay active. So that way I'm not just staring and look at the camera. Because if you've seen some of my past videos, you know how that can go. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. Right, okay, so I'll just start by cutting these images out of these papers. They're kind of relatively the same shape, but I'm going to really try to make them different shapes, and then I will lay them out on the board, and once I like how they're laid out, I'll glue them on. We'll see. That's usually my process. I've never filmed myself while I'm doing it, so let's see if I stick to this order. So The Hate You Give was published in 2017 by Angie Thomas. It was in part inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement. Even though most of us know BLM through the pandemic and the way it blew up on TikTok, on social media, after the murder of George Floyd, this organization was actually established in 2013 in July and had been actively doing activism work. So some prominent and I think important things to note about the establishment of BLM being created in 2013 is that Trayvon Martin, which if you guys don't know, Trayvon Martin was a 17-year-old boy that was murdered by George Zimmerman in Florida. George Zimmerman was a self-appointed kind of neighborhood patrol watch, and while Trayvon Martin was walking home one night on the phone with his girlfriend, George Zimmerman chased him down and killed him. And there was no accountability for that. He was not indicted or found guilty for his crimes. I read somewhere that he sold Skittles wrappers. Can't say if that's 100% true. Wouldn't be surprised though. So actually I was wrong. He did not sign a Skittles wrapper, but he did sign a gun at a guns convention in Florida. So take with that what you will. So that's just one example of a really notable case that happened right before the establishment and creation of BLM. However, that was not an isolated event. There's a obviously a history of police bias towards African Americans, people of color, not just within police, systematic racism in the criminal justice system as well, pretty much in most aspects of life. And that leads to just, a lot of inequity. I probably don't need to explain this. I think most people understand, but I'm just kind of going through it and a lot of the history about kind of the movement, why it was created, and, you know, this could go back. We could actually take this really, really far. So I guess I'll kind of wrap this up now. The book is set in Garden Heights and follows the life of Star. Star is a 16-year-old girl that lives in, Garden Heights. She goes to a primarily white school because her parents want her to have a good education. So she attends the prep school, Williamson Prep. And as I said, it is a predominantly white, wealthy private school. And so it follows her journey switching between these two environments, code switching. For those of you who don't know what code switching is, essentially it's changing your behavior, your mannerisms, and how you present yourself in different environments. And it's really common. I think most of us do this in ways that we don't really realize. However, in this case, the contrast is quite strong. She feels very, very isolated in this white preppy school because she feels like she can't truly be herself. She sees people using black slang, wearing Jordans, things typically associated that actually originate from black culture, and she just doesn't really even feel like she can do those things because it'll come across as ghetto or she'll be stereotyped. And unfortunately, while I want to say that it's sad, I definitely will say that, but I also think she's right in that sense. And she's in an environment where she's accepted because she's presenting with a certain type of behavior. However, that's not necessarily entirely who she is, and she doesn't feel like she can show that other side of herself that she shows when she's at home with her family, her community, and she feels more comfortable. She is dating a white boy named Chris, and she doesn't let him come to the house. She's very distant from him at times because she feels like, it's he'll never understand her, he'll never be able to be with her, people are judging them, and this creates a lot of the stigma creates a lot of anxiety in her head and really kind of gets in the way of her relationship at times because she's so worried about people's bias. And I want to say that that's not true and people wouldn't think that way, but time and time again people have proven that this is the way that they think and that they have these racist tendencies, racist and colonialist ideas. So the story follows Star switching between these two different environments, and quite early on in the book, she witnesses something traumatic as well. So she's at a party in Garden Heights, and there's a shooting associated with one of the major gangs that controls the area, which is the King Lords. They play a big role in the book. I'll maybe get into that in a little bit. But there's, someone fires a gun, and Star runs out. At the party, she had met her childhood friend Khalil, who she had a crush on, and just was somebody, she talked about being at his grandmother's house and growing up with him and her other friend Natasha. I'll talk about Natasha in a second. And anyways, the shooting happens. They leave the party. On the way home, they're stopped by police, and her friend Khalil is actually killed in a police shooting. He's murdered by the cop, Officer 115, when he is reaching into the car to check to make sure that Star is okay and grab a hairbrush. And this happens. There's in that interaction with the police officer before that, there's a lot of different biases. Khalil is very upset that he got pulled over. Star had just found out potentially that he had been involved in drug dealing and he doesn't really want to talk about it. The officer then assumes that there might be drugs in the car, and all of these stigmas and biases that exist in a racist system like the police really come out to play in that scene. And yeah, Khalil is shot by the police officer 115 in front of her, completely changing her life forever. Her life, the life of her family, and the people around her. Not only does this traumatic event happen that she has to witness, she then has to go back to her school at Williamson Prep, where this event has gone viral on the news, and she has to act like, it's okay, nothing has happened. She doesn't want to give away that she's the black girl, as she says in the book, that knows the guy that was shot by the police. And so she conceals that information in order to protect her identity. And there's so much more that goes into that. And I really like how this book presents, her story of finding her voice and self-discovery and learning that that is really the most powerful weapon, and what it means to kind of be two different people in two different places. And but the family, Star's family, I think is they're all really, really great characters as well. Maverick, her father, he was in prison when she was a child. He was initially associated with the King's Lord, but by serving time for the head of the gang, King, he was actually able to leave the gang. And so he has a grocery shop within Garden Heights. The mother wants to leave, but he's really, really committed to staying in the community and doing what is important to protect the community where he was raised. He doesn't want to leave them. Versus Star's mother feels quite differently because she wants her kids to get out. She wants them to have better opportunities, be in a better environment. And I think, Star at the end is very, very influenced by her father. And that is why she decides to speak out about these things and, eventually finds her voice. But I think that caution and that love from her mother really shows that support, because her dad loves her and is very caring, but I think he does it in a little bit of a harsher way. Maybe as dads all do. But I think, yeah, the family dynamic is really, really important. Also, the way that Star's mother takes complete care of Seven. So, Seven is Maverick, Star's father's son. Oh, I set this up so poorly. Maverick's son from another woman when they were separated. Star's mother and father were separated. He got with this woman named Aisha, had a baby with her, and from that, Aisha's now actually with King, who's the head of the gang. That's a whole other dynamic. I don't think I'll get into that in this video. I'm not trying to spoil everything. But Star's mother actually takes in Seven like her own, because Aisha is not a great mother. She's more interested in partying, spending time with King, and really neglects her children in a lot of different ways. So Seven is actually Star's half brother, because they do not have the same mother. So I guess it's probably important to ask, why a book about confronting justice, about things as important and real as police brutality, are being challenged and banned in districts around the US. Why does this keep happening? Why are there challenges? Why is it banned? And we'll just get into that right now. Some of the major challenges: Texas, as usual, has challenged this book in a couple different districts, notably once in 2017 and another time in 2022, even though in 2022 it has not completely been removed. It is just pending review, while the school district, Katie, it's my sister's name, while the school district is deciding if it is appropriate. It has also been banned in South Carolina and challenged in Florida and Pennsylvania for divisive themes, complaints about languages, and also sexual conversations, sexual topics. Regarding the sexual topics, it's actually, when I heard that it was being challenged because of sexual references, is how they put it, I was kind of confused at first. I was like, what are they talking about? And then I remembered that one of the one of the plot lines of the book and Star's life is the idea about being ready for sex and when you're ready for that time. So I'm not going to say exactly what happens. Again, I'm not trying to do spoilers, but that is one of the, I guess, themes within the book. Also, there's lots of conversations about baby mamas, having children outside of marriage, having, children with multiple women. And I did not find any mention of that specifically being the reason that it was challenged for sexual references. However, I wouldn't be surprised if that bias kind of played a role in that decision. So typically on the conservative side, this book is challenged because of the profanity, its use of language in the novel. They argue that it's not appropriate for students. The references to drugs within the novel. Brenda, who's Halil's mom, actually is an addict, and they talk about it quite openly, and it's, I think, a very, very important part of the story. They also talk about it in reference to Thug. So I guess I should probably explain the title, Thug, The Hate You Give. And essentially it comes from the Tupac Shakur song, Thug Life, which means the hate you give little infants fucks everyone. So it's an acronym that kind of describes the idea that the system society creates, like poverty, discrimination, violence, neglect, will often damage everybody, and it creates this generational harm and this loop that people are not able to get out of. And so with the book The Hate You Give, Maverick, Star's father, and Star talk about this concept a couple of times, because it's pretty important, I think, to understand. And Maverick specifically wants her to understand that there's nothing wrong with her. It's not her lapse. It's not Halil's fault. It is the way that the system works. And they give a really, really good example about um, airplanes and addiction within Black communities. But these drugs are flown in on private planes. Who in their neighborhood has a private plane? And so there's this systematic loop of harm that keeps communities entrenched in bad environments. They don't bring jobs to these areas, such as Garden Heights, just as a fictional example, but it does describe exactly what's happening in these cases. And that theme is very reoccurring in the book, especially when, Star begins to speak out, goes on to trial, and the results and events that follow that towards the end of the novel. In terms of conservative challenges, this book is commonly criticized on the right for profanity, drug references, the sexual references that I mentioned before, violence, such as domestic violence, police fights, and some anti-police messaging. It's seen as politically divisive because it's not pro-cop. It doesn't present both sides of things, and that is used as a way to diminish the story's importance and power, because they're alleging that there's no nuance or context to it, and that's taking away from this experience. I think this book portrays police brutality, and that doesn't necessarily make it anti-police. It just portrays a side of our society that we need to have more awareness of, and not just awareness, but a response and justice and just basic accountability and immediate reduction of police violence. We need to be taking immediate steps to train police officers better and have more community safety and have mental health support involved at earlier moments, because all of these different factors can really, really, really help minimize the amount of violence and unjust violence that happens. However, at the same time, this is a systematic problem. Training a couple individuals here and there is not going to fix everything. So I recognize that there needs to be a larger restructuring of police and so many different things related to reparations and all of those important movements. Something that Maverick as well references a lot in the book is the Black Panther 10-point program, which is essentially the Bill of Rights that they created, demanding how they think that society needs to restore balance to people of color, and specifically the Black community, and also lists out the ideals that the Black Panthers had. And it talks about finding justice and using your voice and speaking out at all costs. And people take that to different lengths, and I'm not here even to condemn the lengths that people took it to, because when your community is under attack, you're going to do what you need to do. These topics are seen, as I was saying, as politically divisive, where in reality, I think that they're just highlighting another perspective that needs to be broken down more, understood, so these systems can be reshaped. In terms of on the left, with the progressive criticisms, people say that the story is just focusing on trauma-centered representation. It doesn't give an accurate picture to what the lives of people of color and Black Americans face every day. It's painting one narrow image of people in serious harm. And I do think that the story focuses a lot on the harm that people are facing, whether it's generational in that specific moment, like with the shooting death of Khalil, or if it's like a bigger picture. But at the same time, I think it is that's what the story is about. It's not supposed to be a fun story. There's moments where you can laugh at it and enjoy it, but it's not supposed to be a story that makes you just smile the whole time or feel good, or, you know, you're supposed to think about it and maybe you're supposed to be a little uncomfortable. Okay, well, they're all cut up now. Now I'm going to, as I was saying, lay them out on here, and then eventually I will glue. So back to the progressive critiques. I think even though it is a story about trauma that could be triggering, I think that these stories are also important to discuss. And trauma-centered stories not only are important because maybe the author is expressing something that is related to their lived experience, but I think it also provides a platform, a private platform for people to begin to understand their own experiences and also understand the different experiences of other people. I'm aware that there is limited, you know, fantasy stories and access to fantasy stories that center around people of color. And I think that is a growing problem that we need to address. And I think there has been, efforts to address that. But at the same time, I think people tend to gravitate towards these stories because they feel like, oh, this is the experience I need to know. This is an experience that is happening to a lot of people that I feel helpless about. So by reading these books, they feel like they're educating themselves. That's not necessarily wrong. I think I said that because I think it's true. But at the same time, I don't know. I think that it's important to have these stories so people can not just learn experiences that aren't their own, but understand their own as well. If you're from a community like Garden Heights or you're like Star and you have to, shift how you behave and you feel like you have to shift how you behave in different environments, this book probably will relate to you and be really significant. So yeah, again, I think it's important to have these types of conversations to discuss why these books are challenged. However, I also, I have to acknowledge this is not my lived experience. I am not the authority on this topic. I'm just bringing forward my own opinions on this as somebody who, loves books, and I also do care a lot about these things. So that is my so-called authority on the topic, if you want to call it that. I'm not actually calling it that. Okay, anyways, check in. This is how it's going. Pretty happy with it. I have so many. I always have extras, and the ones that I don't use, I make into little bookmarks, and I keep in my books. This is the book I'm reading right now, not related to the book club. It's called Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. I'm barely into it. My friend Kelly got this for me for Christmas, and I'm very, very excited to finish it. And perhaps I'll do a little update or separate video about that when it happens. Something else I think that's important to mention is critics argue as well that Halil's character is imperfect and, again, is trauma-centered and actually promotes stereotypes. I would disagree with that as well. I think that maybe this book presents things in a simplistic level. I think it's important to remember that it is a young adult book, and it's made, as I said, it's made for people to understand their experiences, but it's also made for people to learn new experiences. And I think the point of this book is to present an example that I don't want to say is simple, like it's so easy, because that's, one, insensitive, and it's not true either, but they want to make it in a way that's digestible for all sorts of audiences. And I think Angie Thomas actually does a really, really good job about that. And I would even say the movie that I watched, it came out in 2018. I think that movie did a really, really good job of that as well. Oh, not here. So yeah, anyways, that's kind of my perspective on that. They need to make it something that people are able to understand, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. And I think, that's why we have to have critical thinking skills of our own. We have to be able to look at a story and say, okay, is there more to this? Do I agree with this presentation? I think, it helps that this was written by a woman talking about some of her own experiences and the experiences of people in her community and the people around her. It wasn't just, somebody that had no relation to the topic personally writing a book about it. Um, so yeah, that's my opinion. Take that as you will. I'd love to hear your thoughts more specifically on this topic. And I think the fact that Halil is not this like perfect symbol and this perfect martyr actually adds to the story and the dynamic of what they're trying to tell. I think some of the accusations of the anti-police rhetoric, the anti-police message comes from the protests. I'm not going to talk about specifically what the protests are about because I think that would be a spoiler, to be honest. But during the protests, they are storming the streets, lighting police cars on fire. This book came out in 2017, and there have been protests like this for as long as the US has existed. But at the same time, I think a lot of us saw this in 2020. I know I saw it in my own city of Seattle, and people, lighting cars on fire, storming the streets, looting. And I think this reaction comes from feeling like there is so much injustice happening and so much harm that there's nothing left to do but storm the streets, speak out loudly, because people don't listen to your quiet voices. People don't listen when you're polite and you're just presenting how they want you to. They will just take and take and take, and people are fed up and they protest. And while all of kind of that was happening, the police are trying to stop it, break it down, fighting against it. They're trying to get the protesters to disperse and have, thrown tear gas at them. And that is a very, very crucial moment for Star in the story as well. Again, I won't say why, but I think it is a really, really important time for her. And she does, you know, use her voice, which is the general theme of this story. Another interesting part, I think, of this anti-police debate is that people tend to forget that Star's uncle in the story is a police officer, and he's also Black. This is, I think, a really interesting dynamic. People, you know, the father, at least, Star's father, who he already has some resentment against the uncle because he was in prison for a lot of Star's childhood and Seven's childhood. And so during that time, the uncle kind of stepped up and helped out around the house. And yeah, like I said, this led to a lot of resentment, I think, between the uncle and the father. Not I think, I know it did. I mean, it's explicitly said in the story. I just got sidetracked because I'm gluing and trying to figure out which shape. Star's uncle is a police officer, and so he kind of speaks about this other perspective a little bit more, and he's trying to get Star to speak out and, do the right thing and follow kind of the police process, which throughout the story they break it down more and break down if something like that is actually going to help and why it won't. Essentially, Maverick has a different opinion on it than um, the mom, for example, Lisa, and so they're kind of juggling these two separate positions and these two separate ideas. So I think the inclusion of his character is really, really good. I also think they could have potentially developed it more. That's all I'm really trying to say. I don't necessarily agree. I think my personal opinions on the topic would lie more with the side of Star's father and less with Uncle Carlos. However, I've had to work with police officers in my job, and I do think I've had the privilege of seeing so many people that really do want good, but I can't lie and say that it's entirely like that. And I think other people definitely can speak to that experience more than me. But they try to balance, or Angie Thomas tries to balance this kind of duality of this story about police brutality with a cop uncle. And I think that, yeah, it could have been developed more because it's a really, really important part. And one of the final pieces about this story that I do think is really interesting is, the book is set in modern times. So at the end of the book, Star references people that have lost their lives due to police brutality, police violence, Oscar Grant, Trayvon Martin, for example, Tamir Rice. I think the story exists in this like internet era, in this modern day time period, and So by referencing these real life events, internet culture, the virality of things, the way the media plays a role in shaping community narratives, global narratives, they all tie together. And I think that's one of the most interesting dynamics about this story. This is a fictional event that happens, but by bringing in real voices and real lives that have been lost, it only emphasizes the um, significance of it and why the story needs to be centered more and why these stories are just incredibly, incredibly important in today's society, especially, as I said, with things like ICE and people being killed at protests by ICE. We have a right to protest as US citizens and speak out about our voice. And I mean, you also have a right to protest not as a US citizen. If you are in the United States, you have a right to legally and lawfully protest. So people should be doing that, and there should not be any type of repercussions, let alone fatal ones, for exercising your right to do that, especially when you're protesting against injustices that you're seeing happen at the hands of the government or the state or local authorities or one class of people or one race of people. We should, be able to speak out about that. And I think the internet has provided a really good platform for doing that. And we've seen successes with it, we've seen struggles with it, but I think the fact that you can post something and share it for everybody to see builds this community of, okay, these are patterns, we are not alone, and it speaks to the volume of this problem. Okay, so what do I think? I, surprise, surprise, do not think that this book should be challenged or banned in any schools. I think that this story, as for all the reasons we've just discussed, mention and list out some really, really important topics that, deserve to have their place in society, in the world today. And we should be making more of an effort actually now than ever before to continue to center these voices and make them important and make them a larger part of the conversation. Maybe they're uncomfortable. Maybe you have a family member who's a police officer, just like Star. Or maybe it's not an experience that you know, and you're not in an environment that has really fostered a good understanding of police brutality and what that looks like. And this could be your first exposure to it, but at the same time, I think that doesn't make it any less important to have these conversations. Discomfort is not the same as harm. I really liked when I was speaking about this with Kirsten when we talked about To Kill a Mockingbird in February, because during that conversation, she talked about classrooms and learning environments like libraries, schools, after school clubs being a place where people can share experiences, they can ask questions, and you can make mistakes because you're making a mistake in a safe environment. And learning to tolerate conversations and topics that maybe are not easy, I think is part of being a resilient and strong member of a community and a member of the diverse. Shielding students from difficult topics and difficult stories is not actually protecting them. It's just leaving them in a position where they're not going to be prepared when something like this comes up again, and they're not going to be prepared when the real world happens to them, or it will make other young people feel even more isolated in their situation because they've, like Star, when she was at Williamson Prep, she went through this traumatic, horrible experience, and she didn't feel like she could tell anybody about it because she was so worried about, how they would perceive her, how they would think about her. And, I think that that is a very, very tragic but also valid kind of concern that she had. And I wish it wasn't that way, but unfortunately, that's the reality that we live in. Exposing young people to these stories is crucial in developing empathy and allowing people to care, for people to understand, and also for people to ask questions. I think it'll just continue to build community if we accept and appreciate diversity in lived experience. This book does not glorify violence. It examines injustice, systematic injustice. It explores grief and fear and courage and what it means to be brave and finding your voice even when you don't have it. Star's mom says, brave does not mean you're not scared, Star. She says, it means you go on even though you're scared, and you're doing that. And I think that that is one of the most important messages to the book that people everywhere can relate to. And I wish more people understood. It's important to keep speaking out, to keep trying, to keep advocating, and to keep being a member of a community that wants to support and wants the best for each other. And I think that's the biggest journey that Star kind of experiences at the end and throughout the novel as she overcomes grief and loss and trauma. All right, so the vision board is completed, and I'm just letting it sit for a second so the glue can settle. And before I go, I want to leave you all with a quote by Desmond Tutu, who was a South African human rights activist and theologian during the apartheid era. And I think this quote, most of you guys will know it, but I think it's pretty relatable and significant to this story. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, then you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse, the mouse will not appreciate the elephant's neutrality. And I think that this book is so important because it's meant to provoke outrage from people across the political spectrum. It's made to create a reaction. It's made for people to wake up and say, oh my God, I cannot believe this is happening in my community, in my neighborhoods, with the people I know, with people that I go to school with. And I think it shows the need that we have for these stories to stay in conversation with everything that's been happening and going on today. Star's story is about identity, courage, fear, using your voice, and using your voice, especially even if there is a cost to something. And I think that's something we all need to remind ourselves, and we all need to keep in mind that it's not always going to be easy to do the right thing. If it was easy, more people would do it. So we should all follow Star's example a little bit. Ignoring conversations about race, violence, and injustice doesn't make these situations disappear. It just makes them easier to avoid, and it perpetuates the harm because people are not able then to speak out about what's happening to them, and stories are dismissed even more than they already are today. I think the overall message of this novel is that systems in society create inequity, and everybody is affected differently by them. And it's not just the people that are creating the rules that are impacted. Often it's actually the opposite, that the people that enforce the law, the people that are making laws and policies in Congress, the people making decisions as the executive officer, they're not representative of the people that they serve entirely. And I think when you get to that place, it's easy to be corrupted. It's easy to just kind of go with what everyone around you is doing. And I would say anybody, I tell myself this, but anybody who's trying to have a voice in this space, remember that nothing is more important than that lived experience. And we have to keep centering that if we want to make the changes that we want to make. But I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this book. If you think it's educational, harmful, if it's necessary, if there's other books that you would want to recommend or suggest for, people to understand these stories more. I did recently just watch Fences. I know it's not a book, but, well, it is actually a book, but I haven't read the book. I just watched the movie with Denzel Washington and Viola Davis. Highly recommend. I've heard great things about the book, and it shows another type of systematic injustice based in reality, but this reality is Pittsburgh in the late 1950s and follows the life of the first African American garbage truck driver, and kind of the life that he experienced and what it was like being a person of color during that time. Okay, so it's drawing. I'm kind of filming back in because there was a point that I thought of that I forgot to mention. And I think it's kind of interesting to compare this book with To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, which was February's book of the month. Both of them talk on topics of criminal justice bias, police bias, and also both of them are told from a child's perspective. I think that the difference is Scout is coming from it from the position of a young child learning about racism versus Star is somebody who has viewed and experienced systematic racism her entire life and is just now coming to terms with what that means in a reality. And I know I've said I'd mention it earlier and I'm just mentioning it now, but not only was Halil killed by Officer 115, her childhood friend was killed in front of her when she was 10 in a drive-by shooting, Natasha. So not only now has she seen one of her friends die, she had already witnessed her childhood best friend die at a very young age in front of her. So even if she didn't necessarily have exactly this kind of words for it and the names for it in this novel, which I think she did, but it is kind of her journey of discovering it, but in a very different way than Scout was discovering it. So, yeah, I think that is just really important to bring up. Okay, here it is. So I am so happy with it. I mean, my summer vibe is just gratitude, travel, yeah, and just kind of putting good energy out there, hoping that it, comes back, and also hoping that it finds the people that need it. And I want to keep posting these videos, kind of building whatever this is. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I'm happy, and I hope you guys are too. So as I said, this was our May book. Now we are going into the month of June, where we are going to read All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, which is, on the title, it describes itself as a memoir manifesto about growing up Black and queer. I'm super excited to get into this book and to discuss the reason why it's banned, do some research. So you'll get a video about that in June. I'll be posting an interview for The Hate You Give in June as well. One day I'm going to get them out in the same month, but it's just not the way that the cookie has crumbled this year. And yeah, I'm really, really excited to bring you guys these different topics, bring you guys different guests, and talk about topics and themes that are really, really important to the books. So we'll get someone fun for this as well. And yeah, I'm really, really excited to dive right into it. The Substack article will be coming at the beginning of the month if you want to dive into kind of the topic before we get there. Thank you guys so much for joining me for this one. I hope that, we keep reading like freedom depends on it. We keep fighting for these stories to stay in the conversation because they are so, so phenomenally and significantly important. And yeah, so I will see you on the next one. Bye.